Wild from PESI, and we are so excited to talk to you today about our upcoming summit on narcissism and gaslighting on January 22nd and 23rd. There's a QR code at the top of the screen that should get you directly to the site for more information about this summit. And today it is my pleasure to be here to talk to Dr. Ramani. She's a leading expert in the field of narcissism, and her recent book is called Should I Stay or Should I Go? Surviving a Relationship with a Narcissist. And her session in our summit is exactly about that topic. And we are so excited to have her present for us. Hello, Dr. Ramani.
Hi, Gwen. And actually, I have a new book coming out on the 20th of February called It's Not You. So that's even more germane to like sort of helping clients heal from narcissistic relationships. But should I stay or should I go? You're absolutely right, is exactly what my program's about.
Great. Can't wait to read your new book too. Okay, let's just start out with you giving us a little summary of what are the classic signs of narcissistic relationships?
Yeah, so in narcissistic relationships, when we see a chronic asymmetry in these relationships, and for us as clinicians, if we have a client who's experiencing a narcissistic relationship, it's not unusual for them to come into therapy very confused in every way. Exactly what's going on? Am I to blame? Am I a bad person? I can't believe I'm thinking this about my partner. Maybe all relationships are hard, that kind of thing. And this idea, you know, it's funny. We did a straw poll of a large group of survivors of narcissistic relationships, and about 80% of them said they were seeking out help for, you know, assistance in intimate relationships. And I think that's a lot of what comes into therapists' offices. And what we see with these clients is these are clients who are confused, they're self-blaming, they're self-doubting, there's a lot of rumination, a lot of regret, helplessness, hopelessness, powerlessness, tremendous amounts of anxiety, and other negative affectivity like depressive symptoms and dysphoria, that sort of thing. These are clients who have trouble concentrating. They might have sleep difficulties, appetite difficulties. And you can see, even as I'm giving you this laundry list, you see a lot of hyperarousal, hypervigilance. You sort of diagnostically would likely veer into things like post-trauma and mood disorders and anxiety disorders. And those things may also be simultaneously happening for these clients. But this sort of sequelae, especially around the significant amounts of self-blame, particularly in relationships, and a lot of self-doubt and a lot of backing and forthing, and this almost a sense of moral injury. Am I the bad one? Really tends to be observed in clients who are experiencing these kinds of narcissistic relationships.
Sure. Yeah. Very difficult. Okay, so your upcoming session is titled Should They Stay or Should They Go? And it's about working with ambivalent clients who are making those difficult decisions. What are the primary reasons that people choose to stay in antagonistic and narcissistic relationships?
So that's a great question, Gwen. And there's a couple of reasons. You know, one is the not knowing, right? It's not having a good working understanding of what an antagonistic or narcissistic relationship is about. And particularly issues around the very low likelihood of change, that there's nothing that the client can do to change it. In fact, there's probably not much that the individual who's engaging in the behaviors is going to do to change it. So it's the lack of understanding of the dynamics of these relationships. There are also, though, practical factors: money, family court, custody, duty, obligation, cultural issues, fear, finances. These things are very real. And again, as clinicians, we really, it's this idea of, in fact, probably the most irresponsible question we could ever ask a client in one of these situations is, why are you staying, or why didn't you leave? Because many times the reasons for leaving, if somebody plunked a lot of money in some of these folks' bank accounts, they'd leave. So we're really talking about everything from the practical to, again, cultural factors that could make it very difficult or even unsafe for them to leave. And then there is fear of post-separation abuse if they were to leave, fear of what would happen in family court around custody, or what the outcomes would be, for example, for minor children. There's also hope. I mean, a lot of that relates to the education. There's still this belief of, what if I'm wrong? What if this isn't what it is? What if they change? What if they change for the new person? What if I end up alone forever? So a lot of that, it's not only hope, it's where hope meets fear. We also can't underestimate that these are folks who still may love this individual. And one of the real qualities of the narcissistic relationship is that it vacillates from good days to bad days. So you will have these good days that seem at least superficially fine. I mean, the trains are running on time. Nobody's yelling at anyone. You might go to a movie. You might have a nice dinner. The family might be home for the evening and it's fine. But the bad days are absolutely treacherous, because it's not just a bad day where someone's sort of stomping around the house because they're mad at work. It's invalidation, it's manipulation, it's gaslighting, it's stuff that destabilizes the other person in the relationship. So I'm putting a fine point on this, because some clinicians will say, well, aren't good days and bad days a part of any relationship? Not at this level, because the bad day isn't just sort of a rainy day. It's like a rainy day that targets you and tries to make you feel bad about yourself. This is very different. And so, but in the midst of all this chaos, some people will say, we have a history together. Those good days, I really love those good days. I like being married. I like our home. I like parts of our routine. Like, there's things people hold on to. And again, we as clinicians have to be very careful to say, well, you might like your home, but this is absolutely madness. We don't get to say that. When we're managing sort of that very delicate space of ambivalence, it's about giving the client a safe space to share all of this confusion and not feel as though someone's trying to sort of box them into an agenda. And it can be frustrating for us as clinicians, saying like, oh my gosh, like they may end up choosing, the backyard with a swimming pool over their sanity. And they may, And our role then is to support them, because they may be making micro changes. And maybe this year they're not leaving, but it may be in a year and a half, though, through the ongoing work, and you're fostering their sense of self and their sense of who they are outside of this relationship. All these micro changes may actually result in a different place. But this ambivalence is a classical element, and thus the should I stay or should I go?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the course, and I just wanted to put a little plug in for one of our other presenters. Dr. Catherine Barrett is speaking on coercive control and that very real fear of what can happen in family court and with child custody and more. So that's going to be a great session as well. Okay, so big question. With the right therapy, are narcissists likely to be able to recognize and change their antagonistic behaviors?
No, not likely to. No. I mean, because there's a lot of ifs in that sentence. The narcissistic person has to be aware enough that it is their behavior that is not acceptable and is causing problems in the relationship, for them to not deflect and project blame onto the other person in the relationship, then have the humility to seek out help, not in a performative way, but in a committed way, to make real change and to manage the vulnerability and the shame that comes with that, to get into therapy, commit to therapy, even when the therapy starts becoming vulnerable. Narcissistic folks are 60 to 70% more likely to drop out of therapy, and then manage all of the other stuff like the impulsivity and the anger dysregulation and all the other stuff that makes a relationship a very unsafe place with them. The odds of all of that lining up are of such a low likelihood that working with a client on the possibility of that happening is actually really kind of cruel, because it's so unlikely. Actually can't count on it in my hands and toes the number of times I've seen this, because I haven't. And so I do want to, I think that, we can sit here and talk in probabilities and statistics and case studies and all of that. I can tell you with some confidence, the client who you're seeing in your office is not going to have that experience. And so the radical acceptance piece is that this is not likely to change. And whatever amount of change that happens on behalf of the narcissistic person may not be enough to course correct or sufficiently make amends for the harms that have occurred within this relationship.
Okay, good to know. Okay, so what is the most common mistake clinicians make in working with clients who are deciding whether to remain in this kind of a relationship?
That it's holding an agenda for them. Some clinicians, many clinicians who do this work and do this work beautifully, sometimes bring their own story into that, whether it's family of origin stuff, whether it's their own relationship that they've had. We cannot view our, if you will, let's say a clinician left one of these relationships and has gone on to a really wonderful life outside of it. We cannot proselytize and we cannot have an agenda for these clients. When we work with these clients, we have to be acutely aware of the delicate balance of all those factors I talked about: the practical, the love, the hope, the need for knowledge, and also the cultural and intersectional factors. It's actually really dismissive to say, well, just know you can get your own apartment. Do you know that? Have you seen their bank account? Are you aware of this? And so we might make assumptions on the basis of social class. We may not be aware of sort of how social class might intersect with things like ethnicity, reflecting on how empowered one is in a culture. They may be regarded very differently in family court, depending on some of those intersectional variables. So it is to hold an agenda for them is the biggest mistake we make. Our role in this place of ambivalence is to hear their story, but also be aware of things like recovery capital, like things that many concepts from the substance use literature, addiction literature, where we learn about when we're shoring a person up to protect them from things like relapse. A lot of those tools can be brought to bear here. We're also sort of working with the client and determining what do they have around them? What supports do they have around them? What can they access? Who are their people? And one thing I want to highlight in my program, that I'll be doing at the summit is, because there's so many, we only have a finite amount of time. This is not meant to be a program that's focused on people who are fleeing acutely dangerous situations. Dr. Barrett will be getting into some of that too. That's not this. These are your clients where there's not physical violence occurring, where it is not an acute dangerousness situation per se that is occurring, and it is an intimate relationship. Because this is where, for clinicians, it's not as like, pack a go bag, this is danger, get out. This is a lot more subtle. This is a lot more nuanced. And we are creating a space, a safe space for this client to mentally explore it. And a lot of what we're doing with these clients are mental experiments for them to almost take these little tours, if you will, of what it would look like if they did this, and to pay attention to somatic and emotional reactions to all of that. But I'd say that any form of agenda holding, and frankly, I'm talking about the leave agenda, it's equally, if not maybe even more dangerous to insist that they stay. Well, all relationships have their bumps in the road, and maybe you need to give them a chance, or even shaming the client for implying that perhaps their partner is narcissistic. That is not going to fly, because for many clients, they have been shamed in silence for a very long time. The last place that they should happen is the therapist's office.
Wow. Sounds like a big job.
Yeah.
Okay. What is cognitive dissonance, and what does it typically look like in clients in antagonistic relationships?
So cognitive dissonance is the tension that's created by any form of mental or emotional inconsistency. In the simplest example, it could be that, I don't know, for some reason you can't join your friends out on a big dinner they're going out to. So you tell yourself, oh, that's not a very good restaurant anyhow. It's the things we tell ourselves to reduce this internal sense of tension, because that tension is very uncomfortable. In a narcissistic or an antagonistic relationship, the way we sort of bring the dissonance sort of back into a space of congruence is we justify what's happening in the relationship. They didn't mean it. I think I heard them the wrong way. They had a tough day at work. Maybe it's not that bad. Taking somebody's sort of gaslighted, angry tantrum day after day is turned into, they had a tough day, they had a tough dad, they have a tough backstory. You diminish the tension and you maintain the status quo, which we are homeostasis, sort of seeking people, creatures. That's what we do. And so what the problem with the cognitive dissonance is, over time in a relationship, that justification rationalization framework that allows in the short term the tension of the dissonance to dissipate then becomes almost a schema belief system where increasingly the person's blaming themselves. I'm being too harsh. I need to be nicer about recognizing that sometimes things are hard for them, or not everyone's perfect, and maybe I'm being mean, or maybe this is partly my fault for not trying hard enough. Because what it does then, again, reduces the tension, but over time, those justifications become more and more internalized, really keeping a person stuck, lending itself to this ambivalence where a person, here's the thing, Gwen, even if a person decides to stay, which they often do in a narcissistic relationship, What we'll be covering in this program is guiding the client to being able to stay in a clear-headed, clear-sighted way, in a radically accepting way. Like, okay, now I know what I'm dealing with, so I don't personalize it when they come at me. So I don't blame myself when they're accusing me of something I didn't do. You're giving them the roadmap. So when these things that were often quite destabilizing happen, the client might have a greater likelihood of being able to say, no, this isn't my fault. So they don't have then all the negative emotional fallout from it, if that makes sense. So it is, cognitive dissonance is a classical part of these relationships, and sort of helping the client see it more clearly so they don't keep justifying. And then again, falling into this sort of place of constant self-blame becomes a really crucial sort of pressure point in the therapy.
That makes so much sense. Thank you. And then final question from me today, is it possible for clients who choose to stay in narcissistic relationships to learn to live in an emotionally healthy manner? And as I'm reading that, I'm realizing you did just kind of speak to that. And that's what you're going to touch on in your session as well.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm saying that, as for us as therapists, listen, this is why we get supervision and consultation and go to our own therapy, where we may feel our own sense of grief and sadness at watching somebody sort of what feels like they're frittering their life away in a relationship where they're not being treated in the way they deserve. But we know the reasons that they stay are complicated. I do believe that there are opportunities for people to, for example, do the work of meaning and purpose seeking in other areas of their life. Some people might find that in faith. They might find it in work. They might find it in child rearing. It is about fostering other supports. They may join community groups. They may foster friendships. They may foster healthy family relationships, create other ties outside of the relationship. There's a realization, the penny drop moment in these relationships when people stay in narcissistic relationships is that they've been turning, for example, to a spouse to be that person. And there's a lot of grief in recognizing that in this person's story, that's not what their spouse is going to be. But that doesn't mean that they throw it all away. That then there is an opportunity to create these systems where, again, the grief is that it would not happen in the context of their marriage, but that there's the opportunity to create some of these growth-oriented, meaning and purpose-focused, enhancing spaces in their life that are outside of that relationship. And there is sort of a chronic vacillation into this place of grief. This marriage could have been something different. It could have. Radical acceptance is it's not. And that there are other ways to sort of engage in that kind of psychological growth and groundedness, where the spouse doesn't become the place where a person keeps going and keeps getting burned by or harmed by. It is possible, but it is one hell of a balancing act. And it does require a lot of patience by a clinician in working with clients around this and being prepared for the chronic sort of experience of grief that these clients will often bring to bear, because they'll be doing great for 6 months, 3 months, 4 months. And then they'll have that moment when maybe they slip and they tell the spouse, like, hey, you know what, at work, I got this award for such and such. And they get that usual clap, like, what am I supposed to care? You getting paid more for this? Like, why are you wasting my time with this? And then the client needs to recalibrate, because that will hurt. And it needs those reminders. Take this good news to the places in your life that can be with it. And then they have to work through the grief, those painful reminders. But this marriage, this relationship, whatever it is, will not ever be the thing they want it to be. So it's often a lifelong journey.
Sounds like it. Wow. I know this is going to be a super powerful session. And I just look forward to having many of you who are participating today join us on January 22nd and 23rd. In addition to Dr. Ramani, we have several other great presenters, including Wendy Behary and Amy Marla McCoy. So we have several great ones, Stephanie Sarkis. We hope to see you there. The QR code at the top of the screen will take you directly to our site to register. And I think that's it today. Thank you so much, Dr. Ramani, for this conversation. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gwen. Thank you for hosting the summit as well.
Thank you.